in this episode of the Living God's Light podcast.
Unfortunately, she opened the second valve and didn't close the first valve. And I felt the medicine going up my arm, across my chest, and into my heart. And the next thing I knew, I watched myself leave my body. And then I realized someone was standing beside me. He was to the right of me, and the nurse went running out of the room. And I'll never forget her saying, "I killed him. I killed him."
I am.
I am.
I am.
I am.
I am
Living God's light.
So I want to hear about your greenhouse that you're sitting in right now. Tell us about that.
Well, after my experience and seeing life as it is, and to watch plants grow, it kind of changed the way I did things.
Really?
And I enjoy watching things grow, but I have to watch it first in my hands grow, and then I can see it growing in the planter boxes and out in the raised beds. I have to know that the fruit and the vegetables are going to be good, or I don't plant it.
Yeah. So before your experience, were you interested in plants at all?
I was, but I wasn't as interested as I am now in the last 40 years. It's been something that, everybody needs a hobby. And this hobby is really good therapeutically for me.
Mm. So, Scott, tell me more what you meant when you said you need to see it grow in your hands before you put it in the planter box. What does that mean?
Well, as Vinney knows, we come back with gifts. And some of those gifts mean a lot to me. And when I talk about that gift, it's being able to take a seed and put it in my hand and watch it sprout, watch the stems grow, watch the leaves come out, and watch the vegetables and the flowers develop. And as I see it, when I put the seed in my hand, I can visualize what it's going to look like before it even grows. And I know whether or not it's going to be good or bad. And if it isn't good, it's not going to go in the ground.
Mm.
That's so cool.
So I gotta say, there's an image that comes to my mind as you're talking about that, of God holding each one of us before sending us down here, already seeing the growth that we're going to have, the experiences we're going to have, the joys, the pains, the sorrows, and everything, and then lovingly sending us on our way so that we can experience that growth.
It's interesting you say that, because in my life review, I watched my Heavenly Mother pass me through the cloud into my mother's hands, and then trusting her in taking care of me. So there is a lot of value to that, and it means a lot to me. Can you imagine you giving one of your children to someone else and then trusting them to take care of you, nurture you, feed you, teach you the ways to live? Can you imagine how hard that would be? And I witnessed watching her hand me to my mother.
So, Scott, what can you tell us about for people just joining us, we met at IANS, and actually, Vinney, you've known Scott longer. Do you want to talk a little about that? And then, Scott, I'd love to hear your whole story.
Well, I have first memory of Scott and second memory of Scott. So first memory is through his son, back when we were connected in the old days. And I didn't know him so well then, but knew of him. But what I feel is my sole memory of Scott is when I met you in Salt Lake. I knew the second I hugged you. In fact, I think I just came and hugged you. I was so...
Vinney is very personable, and I love that with you, Vinney, because, the truth comes out, when the spirit talks. And when you put your arm around me, I felt your heart and I knew that you were true. And, you can learn a lot from that by trusting people that have a good heart.
Yeah, big time. And the second I hugged you, I knew that everything that this guy represented was in alignment with truth and within alignment of his experience. And you really helped change my mind. I had this ego voice inside me for years, for more than a decade, telling me, don't share your story. They're not going to know what to do with it. But it was you going on that YouTube video and seeing so many people in the comments. You have the most viewed NDE in history.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big deal, Scott.
Yeah.
It's because your authenticity,
it doesn't mean it doesn't mean
it
that
translates.
It might not mean that much to you, but I promise you it means a lot to people who have found it, because the number might not represent. It's interesting. Our brain goes 25 million. What am I missing? What do people know about that I don't know about? And so they click on it. And so that's why it just keeps growing and growing. And your story just keeps spreading and spreading. And it's going to continue because that's how just our brains are wired. Like, oh, what am I missing? So it's really cool that it's really awesome. You have the most watched NDE story out there.
And what's it at? Do you know what it's at now? Have you checked lately?
My daughter texts me all the time, and I don't watch it because it's just a number to me. She told me it was somewhere around 25,300,000.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
she always informs me, she says, Dad, it just keeps growing, about 6,000 to 9,000 views a day. And
Yeah.
you talk about humbling. And Vinney, I think you know what I mean by this is, our story is just a story.
Mm-hmm.
Our experience is our experience and what we are dealing with. For me, Vinney, it took me 40 years to talk about this because I had to process it. And it was difficult to process because it was stuff that I couldn't really talk about. And
Yeah.
my wife really didn't know all about what I had experienced. My kids knew virtually nothing. So to come out, 4 years ago and talk about it was one of the most difficult things that I have done in my life. But when that spirit tells you that it's time, you listen to it. And as hard as it was for me to tell my story, and I didn't think it would even affect anybody. And if you look at that original video, I was in an old golf shirt. I did not want to do it. I was all sweaty, and my wife and I sat out in the parking lot for almost a half hour to an hour. And I kept telling her, I don't want to do this because no one cares what I have to say anyway. I'm an old man. But it was, we both sat there and we decided to say a prayer. And that prayer is what basically opened the door and told me, get out of the car and go in and tell my story. But even at that, when I went in to talk about it, I told the Wes when he was interviewing me that I don't want you to ask me any questions. I, I just let me tell my story and I'll walk out of here. And then I have fulfilled my commitment to what I was told to do. And all along, it was about the 99 and 1. It was so strong that there was one person that I might be able to help. And if you remember 4 years ago during COVID, there was a lot of people that were dying. And, they had crates full of people in New York. They didn't even have enough room to put people. And so when Wes interviewed me, he said, I think you could really some help by telling your story. And I told him no twice. And the third time he said, with COVID, you might be able to give people hope that their parents or their friends or their uncles, aunts are going to be okay. And to let the people know what is in your heart. And I walked away from him. And it wasn't until I went home and I jokingly told my wife, I said, Connie, this guy wants to interview me. He wants to do a documentary on me and bring me into a studio and tell my story. And I started laughing. And she looked at me real serious and says, I think it's about time. And it was because of her and the faith that she has that I decided to share it. And otherwise, I'd have been just happy taking my story to my grave because this was not part of my bucket list. Just like Vinney, this was not part of your bucket list.
No, not at all.
Uh, you know,
So
I
so we
fought it.
need to be sending all the praise to Connie then. That's where we need to be sending all this praise.
It's interesting, Vinny, you say that because, when I came out of the operating room, she saw a whole different story.
Mm-hmm.
When the doctor walked out and said, everything's okay, we lost him, but we brought him back, she fell into the chairs because the first thing she felt was, my husband died. I got to raise 3 kids by myself. Where am I going to work? I'm going to lose my house. Her side was completely opposite than the beautiful things that I saw. And so every time that I talk about this, my wife really goes through panic because she knows that from that day on, when I was 28 years old, that life would have been different.
Yeah. So, Scott, Alyssa hasn't heard your story. Can you share it with us?
Well, I'm really disappointed in you. I mean, you'll listen to Vinny's story, but you won't listen to my story.
Well, why do you think I'm here today?
We've been saving. We've been like, okay, Alyssa, now you're ready.
Yep, well, that's true.
Vinny told me that you were going to listen to it, so that you'd be able to ask me some questions last night.
Yep.
But I understand my story is just a story.
Well, and I feel like it's important for me to come actually with fresh ears because some of our audience is going to come with fresh ears. And it was really interesting when I heard Vinny's story. I was really protective. If somebody tried to tell me of another NDE story, I was like, you're not listening to me. So, and I think I had to have this little barrier so that I could hear these NDEs on this podcast for the first time and hear it with awe and wonder and, a true, authentic first listen. So I'm really excited to hear your story, Scott. I'm very excited. So
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's hear it. I want to hear all about it.
My experience started up on the ski slopes. We were up at Park City. And to give you a little background before we went to Park City, my goal was to make money. It was all about making money. My background is that I came from a broken family, and I know what it's like to live on the streets and to be hungry. And I was not going to have that happen to my wife and family. And so I took it one step further. I had decided by the time I was 32 years old, and I was 28 at the time, that I was going to be a millionaire, and I was right on track. And I was going to be not working for the rest of my life. And we were very close to that point. But I realized from my experience that there was more to life than just money and fame and gain. Now, I played college baseball. I played professional basketball over in Europe. And so I was used to having people kind of cater to you a little bit. But when you get out into the real world, you got to work hard to get what you want in life. And so I'd been working out in Jackpot on an assignment. I worked for the Postal Service, and I came home at Christmas time, and I hadn't been home. Well, I guess it was probably going on 6 weeks because the weather out there wasn't very good in Jackpot. And if you don't know where that's at, it's between Wells and Twin Falls. It's way out in the middle of nowhere. But I came home, celebrated a good Christmas. I had won two $250 jackpots and a $700 jackpot out there in Jackpot, Nevada at Cactus Pete's. And so we celebrated and had a very good Christmas. Well, after being home so long, I called a friend of mine and said, let's go skiing. And because I love to ski, there is nothing like putting those first tracks down in that powder and hitting the slopes. We went up, I called a friend of mine who was an EMT, and I said, hey, we got to hit the slopes. And so we went up there, and we took about, it's probably about 3 runs down the hill, and it was about 11 o'clock in the morning, and we were standing in the lift line. And I remember this so vividly because it was like it was slow motion. Time in this life doesn't mean a lot to me because I know how to slow things down. And I remember seeing this lady coming down the hill as we were in the lift line, and we were bragging about our jumps and our turns and hitting the moguls, but yet I can still remember seeing her face, and she was in agony. Her poles were going every which way. And I remember she had a fur hat, and it was like a stacked uh, cake on top. And she was dressed to the nines, and I guess she hadn't had a lot of experience skiing. But she came down and took out about 3 or 4 of us. And it was like a bowling ball coming at us. And we were just the pins, and we got knocked over. And I remember picking her up and brushing the snow off of her and getting her poles for her and getting her one ski back on that she lost, and then letting her go on her way, not thinking any more about it. Well, we went and skied. My friend and I went and skied for the rest of the day and had a ball. And we skied down to the car, and back then you could actually just ski right out to your car. And I started taking my skis off, my boots off, and I took my left glove off and I took my right glove off, and I put my hand up like this, and my thumb was hanging down along the edge of my wrist. And what had happened was when she hit us, it completely pulled my thumb out of the socket, and it was just hanging by the skin. Now you wonder why I didn't feel that. Well, if you remember the gloves, they're pretty tight, and so it holds it in place. And back then, the gloves aren't made like they are today. It was cold. It was really cold. We skied in our overalls back then. It was not like the ski equipment that they have now. And I remember my friend who was an EMT at the time said, I can't fix that with a Band-Aid. We're going to have to get you to the hospital. And Park City is a little ways away from Provo. And so what we did is we went back into the ski resort because we didn't have cell phones then. And I called my wife, and she made arrangements for the hospital so that when I got down to Provo, they could do the surgery. As you would expect, when the car started to warm up, my thumb and my hand really started to hurt. In playing sports, I learned how to handle pain and how to play through pain. And when you clear the mechanism in your head, you can separate yourself from your body. And I learned how to take myself to another place so that I would not feel the pain and I'd be able to finish playing the game. And I did that quite a few times going down the mountain because I felt like I was going to pass out. But I remember going into the hospital, and my wife, bless her heart, she had arranged everything. They were ready for me. They were waiting for me. They got me into into the room, and they were prepping me to go in. And then they started to will me out into the operating room. And I'll never forget this, because back then I was so selfish and so self-centered that I never told my wife that I loved her. It was just something that I never grew up with. We didn't have love in our home. And so I never told her I loved her. I never told her to tell the kids that I loved them. The only thing I said was I'll see you when I get back. And that is something that has stuck with me for 40 years. And I've tried to make that change in my life, to tell her how important she is to me and how much I love her and the kids. When they wheeled me into the operating room, they the anesthesiologist got called away, and that was the person that was supposed to inject me and to do to prep me for the operation. The doctor said, I know another procedure called bear block, and that's spelled BEIR block. And basically what it is to put a air tourniquet around your arm. You lift your arm up in the air, you drain the blood out of it, and then you tighten up the valves in that air tourniquet, and then you drop it and you put a local in your operating area, which is where my thumb was. I didn't think anything of it. I thought, okay, he knows what he's doing. We'll just keep on going. And I was laying on the table. They put a sheet between me and where he was operating, so I could hear them what they were saying, because they did a local and he communicated with me, but I couldn't see what they were doing. As they did the local, I felt everything going in. It felt just fine. I felt comfortable. And I remember into the operation, I started feeling pressure down into my arm. And the doctor told the nurse, what you do is you undo one of the valves, but you leave one closed. And the reason for that is so that the medicine in your hand doesn't go up and cause problems into your body. Well, unfortunately, this nurse had never done this operation before, so she totally trusted the doctor, and the doctor, trusted her abilities. So he talked her through the operation. A little while longer into it, my arm started to hurt again. The pressure started building up. And what you're supposed to do is tighten up the first valve and then open the second valve. And unfortunately, she opened the second valve and didn't close the first valve. And I felt the medicine going up my arm, across my chest, and into my heart. And the next thing I knew, I watched myself leave my body and stand above and watch the operation. It was the most natural feeling. It was like, this is the way it's supposed to be. And I sat up there and watched the operation. And then I realized someone was standing beside me. He was to the right of me, and I did not see his face. But what he did is he talked to me through my mind. Now I could hear everything going on down below audibly through my ears, but he talked to me through my mind. The nurse went running out of the room, and I'll never forget her saying, I killed him. I killed him, as she went running out of the room. And I sat there above and uh, looked at the equipment. I saw where I had flatlined. I witnessed where the tools were all laid out for the doctor. And I watched him as he was cutting my arm and taking a tendon out of it to wrap around my thumb. And I remember watching him put pins in my thumb. And I remember that this one pin was just a little bit too big. And he pulled the pin out and he cut it so that it wouldn't protrude through the skin. And I was impressed at what he was doing, because I was watching him operate on me, where before, being behind this sheet, I couldn't see what he was doing. And the person that was standing right next to me was impressed with what he was doing too. And as she ran out of the room, an emergency team come running in, and they put paddles on my chest, and they cut my gown off of me, and they put little monitors all over my chest and on my body. And the most unusual thing was I looked over at the guy that was laying on the table and wondered why he was laying there. I didn't recognize it at first that it was me. And as I watched him, they pounding on my chest and putting those shockers on my chest. They kept talking to the guy that was overlaying on the table, and nothing, that flat line never changed. Then I looked over at the table and I went, boy, that guy looks kind of like me. And then realized that that was me. It was the most unusual feeling that I think I've ever had. As we stood there and watched the operation, I'm going to call him my guardian angel because that's what I feel like he is. I knew that voice. It was a very comforting voice as he talked to me through my mind. Then he said it was time to go. There was no question. There was no question. It was time for me to go. And the next thing I knew, I was standing in a field, and I was standing there. I wasn't by myself. The guardian angel this time was to the left of me, just out of my view, but talking to me through my mind. I knew he was there, and I know it was a man because I recognized the voice. He said to me that I was not allowed to look back again. I could look to the left, I could look to the right, I could look in front of me, but don't look back. And, you know, it was the most calming and peaceful surrounding that I have ever been in. To the far left of me were tall trees. I looked at those trees and they were beautiful. You know, you look at a trunk on a tree and they look so dirty. These trees were just the most brilliant browns with a gold trim or a glimmer on it. And up above, the leaves were red, two different kinds of reds, different colors of greens, but underneath were gold color. I have been searching for these trees for the last 40 years, and a friend of mine, after I told him the story about the trees and I described it to him, says, well, those are baobab trees, and they're in Madagascar. And he said, do you know what the history of these trees are? And I said, no, I don't. Tell me, because I'm anxious to know. He says, well, in Madagascar, these trees are considered the tree of life because they're full of about, anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200 gallons of water. And they sustain the people that live there during their drought season. Now, this made a lot of sense to me because being the tree of life, you know, why wouldn't I see something like that where I was at? But that one was a miracle and a very humbling experience to find out that I knew that tree and I could describe it, and he was able to show it to me. Now, to the right of the trees were flowers. They were the most beautiful flowers that I have ever seen. Colors that I have never seen before. Uh, they were so brilliant. It was something that when I had a lady paint this scene for me, I it was so hard to describe to her what I had seen. And all through the colors, I kept saying brighter, brighter, brighter. And she would say, I don't have paint that's that bright, but it's the colors that I saw. These flowers were all facing towards me. And when you look at a flower, you see petals in the middle. Oh, they were brilliant. And to be able to sit there and look at these petals and I knew that every one of those flowers had a soul that was unbelievable, that was actually looking at me and communicating with me. Now, every one of these flowers were facing towards me. The leaves were all facing towards me. I did not have to walk around the flowers to see everything. They were all facing toward me. And the interesting part was they were leaning towards me. And I could actually feel the energy that was coming from every one of those flowers and the love that was coming from each one of those flowers. And it was a very, very special feeling. Now, in front of me and to the right was tall grass. Now, this grass was individual strands. They were green on the bottom, but the tips were gold. And again, each one of these strands of grass were flowing towards me, as if to show me their love and to show me that I was safe. It was again energy that they were giving off to me. And then there was a cloud in front of me. And it was like there were three clouds. The two side clouds were a pure white. And it's the way you would imagine a cloud as being pure white. But the middle one was a pearl color. And the only way I can describe it is when you look at a car that has a pearl finish and you see blues and blacks and purples, depending on the reflection of the light. Well, that's what I saw in that middle cloud. Behind the clouds were an iridescent blue. It was a blue that I had only seen in Puerto Rico when I went out to the waters where at nighttime you can see iridescent blue colors. And the best time to see those colors is on a clear night. Then I felt that person beside me gone. And you would think when you feel that, when you're not there with somebody, that you would feel a lot of anxiety, that you would feel alone. Um, I was not alone. I did not feel like I was alone. It was the most calming, peaceful feeling and something that I had never felt before, and that was love. That was pure, unconditional love. All of a sudden, I started watching my life from the day I was born until I was 28 years old. You'd think that you would get beat up for everything that you did wrong. That wasn't the case. What it was a learning experience for me, how I could have done better or how I could have treated somebody just better. And I watched my heavenly mother hand my mother on the table and entrust her to take care of me. I watched the sacrifices that my parents went through to put me through sports, and I saw how they went without. I remember very vividly growing up with my brothers and my little sister and seeing that sometimes they went without because of my parents putting so much into me. And as I grew older, I witnessed my parents going through a divorce and how our family just totally went in all different directions. And I was the oldest at 15, and my youngest little sister was probably 4 years old. It took me many, many years to get over that because I felt like they took something away from us. And because of that, I never really lived with either one of them after that again because I had so much anger inside of me. I also saw me getting drafted in the Army, and I was going in the Army to die because that was the main focus on anyone going into the Vietnam War is they were going over there to die. And while I was in the Army, a sergeant major took me under his arm and told me that I had a gift and asked me if I'd play for the base team in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And I told him no twice. And the third time he came to me, he said, "Soldier, I need you to know something. You are going to the front lines, and I may not ever see you again. And I said, I'll play basketball. The rest of my unit went over to Vietnam, and I was one of 3 that came back alive because I did not go. I ended up going to Germany. Well, going through this life review, I was watching all this. Now, watching it, I'm going to put it in a way that it was not watching it through a video screen or on a big screen TV. I was living it in my mind. But everything that I lived, I was doing it through emotion because I was living the other people's emotions. So the people that I worked for, that I stepped on, and getting higher and higher in the business world and making more and more and more money, I lived their emotions of what I did to them. Now, again, this was not a beat up time. It was a time where I had to learn. And it was I was being taught with love, which was just so foreign to me that I just expected somebody to come along and just smack me in the side of the head and send me on my way wherever I was going next. But it was not done that way at all. After this life review, it was so real that I couldn't deny it because I did it. Everything was done in black and white, good and bad. There's nothing on the fence. It was what it was. Then I had a voice that came from in front of me inside of the cloud that instructed me to walk forward. To tell you how the setting was, it was almost like it was a panoramic view. I could see a long ways to the left, long ways to the right. I could see the clouds in front of me, but I wasn't allowed to look back. So I started walking towards the cloud. The most unusual thing happened. Behind the clouds, in the iridescent blue skies, were rays that came out from behind the clouds, as if to pull me towards the clouds. And then I noticed that to my left and to the right, the flowers were turning and facing towards me as if to push me towards the clouds. You have to realize that there is no time up there. No time and no pain. It was the most peaceful, calming, natural situation that I had ever been in. As I walked up to the cloud, I walked up to the middle cloud. And as I got up to the cloud, this much of the arm came through the cloud. Just that much. And I had a chance to study that arm. It was different because it wasn't white, it wasn't black, it wasn't red, it wasn't brown, it wasn't yellow, it was pure. And I don't know how to describe it other than that. It was just pure. And when I stood there and looked at the upper part of his arm, he was strong. And I noticed because of the angle of the arm that he must have been taller than me. And I'm 6'3", and I weigh 260. And I didn't weigh that much back then, but the arm was strong. And when I looked at it, I went, boy, that guy must have been in farming or construction or perhaps a carpenter. Now, back then, I wasn't very religious, and because of the values and self-centeredness that I was. But as the years have gone by, I know who that person was that was there, accepted me into this next realm or the next world. I looked at the hands, and I'll never forget because the fingers were much more meatier than mine, and they were strong. And the way that he was putting his hand out was so calming and so pure. And then I was instructed to take his hand, and I reached up for his hand, and I got this close. And I have never, ever felt energy like that in my life. The energy from that hand went through my hand, through my body, and it was the most pure, unconditional love that I have ever experienced and probably will not experience until I go to that place again. Well, I went to reach for the hand, and the hand started to pull back, and I tried to grab it again because I felt something that I wanted and needed. The arm pulled back into the cloud, and he said, "It is not yet your time. You have more things yet to do." And it is something that has been engraved in my mind for the last 40 plus years. I went back into my body. There was a war going inside of my body that I'd never experienced before. And that is that I did not want to go back. And when I went back into my body, I felt instant pain. I felt like I was being abandoned at first, but yet I knew that I had to learn more. It wasn't until the orderly walked in and put his clipboard on my chest, and I had a sheet over my head, and I had a death certificate saying that I'd been dead for 20 minutes. He dropped the clipboard, and I moved, and he said, "Doctor, I think you better come over here." And I witnessed the doctor taking off his scrubs. He had been washing his hands, and he was really under a lot of distress because he was now going to have to tell my wife that he had lost me on the operating table. And I felt his emotions. It was the most interesting feeling because it's something that we here don't feel is other people's emotions when we're talking to them. My wife was out in the waiting room, and when she first went into the waiting room, it was full of people. And when I was brought out of the waiting room, she was the only one in there. And so when the doctor came over and they started wheeling me out into the hallway. They were taking me to the ICU because this wasn't natural. So I was going to be put in the ICU for 3 days. They wheeled me out, and the doctor walked over to my wife and said, "Everything's okay. We lost him, but we brought him back. But with a little bit of physical therapy, he's going to be just fine." My wife actually fell back into the chairs and just saw something totally different than what I saw. She saw raising 3 kids by herself and losing her house and having to get a job, and how she was going to support and how she was going to adjust losing me. For 3 days in the ICU, I felt total peace. It was something that was so pure, and it is something that I have worked hard to have ever since that day. I'm very fortunate to have that gift of peace, because with the society and the world that we live in, you can really get wrapped up in what's going on around the world with all the wars and contention, and you know, unfortunately, the media is just it's hard to understand. But one thing that I am able to do, and I'm fortunate having the gift that I was given, was to know that I'm going to be okay and that I am not afraid of dying. And that is the best feeling that you could ever have, is knowing that you're not afraid to die.
Thank you for joining us. Coming up next in part 2.
And all of a sudden, the hair on my arms and the back of my neck started going up and started feeling really strange in my body. And I got hit by lightning. And I got knocked off the green, and it was a total whiteout. And the first thing that came to my mind was, I got it. I got it. This isn't going to happen again. I got it.